Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Water Around the World, Local Problems, Global Solutions. My name is Elena Harkness. I'm the Executive Director of Current, and we are so excited, together with our sponsoring partner, the Consul General of the Kingdom of the Netherlands in Chicago, to welcome you here on this really important topic to talk about rainfall, urban flooding, and how to build resiliency in Midwestern cities, Dutch American adaptation approaches. These are my favorite kinds of programs at Current, where we actually get to learn and share from cities across the world that are grappling with the similar issues that are confronting all of us with the changing weather, our changing climate. And we've got a really wonderful range of public, private, and civic sector leaders here to share with us really promising approaches today. Couldn't be more excited for this conversation. If this is your first program with Current or your first Water Around the World, just a few quick housekeeping logistics. First, we really want this to be a very participatory conversation. So we know you all have things to say about this topic and burning questions on your mind. You can submit those in the Q&A tab, and you can also feel free to chat with our panelists in the chat tab. This event, like most of our events, is being recorded, and this link will be shared with all of you as registrants for the event, but also shared out on Current's event page and our YouTube channel, where you can view this event after it's done, but also check out other events that we've done on similar topics. That archive is available to you all the time, and there's a lot of terrific content, so really urge you to take a look at that. Here's how we'll be spending the next 55 minutes together this morning. So we are gonna have the benefit of a problem statement overview and a welcome from our very own Consul General here in Chicago, Bart Twaalfhoven, who's the Consulate General of the Kingdom of the Netherlands in Chicago. I'm very happy to have you here this morning with us, Consul General. And then we're going to have a panel discussion. We're going to dive right into the expert perspectives from John Jacobs, who's Senior Strategic Advisor for Climate Resilience for the City of Rotterdam, Edgar Westerhoff, the National Director for Flood Risk and Resiliency from Arcadis, coming to us from New York City this morning, Ryan Wilson, the Manager of Water Resources at the Metropolitan Planning Council, Holly Sauter, the Principal Civil Engineer from the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District of Greater Chicago, right here in our region. So that we'll spend the bulk of our time hearing from those experts. We'll weave in your Q&A throughout, and we'll get you out just a little bit before 10:30. So that's our agenda for the day. But first, just a really brief overview from Current's perspective, why we bring folks together for these conversations and why we're here at Current to do what we do. We're here because we know that everyone on this discussion today, everyone in the audience, shares the conviction that we need more healthy water to drink and less flood water in our basements. These are common challenges affecting not only all of us here in this discussion today, but people all around the world in increasing numbers all of the time. This is an urgent need because at Current, our perspective is that we need to rally faster behind the new ideas, technologies, and solutions that can help to address these water challenges, to help us all live healthier, better lives with the water that surrounds us. And at Current, we believe that in the innovation that it takes to develop water solutions and bring them to market, this is often too big a problem for any one organization or actor to tackle alone. The kind of collaboration that it takes to solve water challenges requires partnerships that are enduring, partnerships that are multi-sector and multidisciplinary. And Current exists to build those partnerships, to help them survive over the long term, and to help all of us take more rational risks to try solutions faster. That's why we're here today. The way that we do this work is to stay on top of the latest in water technologies, but also, as you'll hear from our presenters today, the solutions that go beyond technology, that require forward-thinking policy leadership, that require creative ways of fostering public-private collaboration. We help to assess those technologies and solutions and recommend them for others to try or for us to pilot ourselves. And so I am now excited to talk about this very pressing challenge that's in front of all of us today, the issue of addressing the rainfall that is intensifying for all of us here, both in the Midwest, but also our friends and colleagues in New York for sure, but also in the Dutch cities that have developed this expertise of managing and living with water over time. But to introduce this topic in a little more detail, I'd love to turn it over to the Consul General of the Kingdom of the Netherlands here in Chicago, Bart Twaalfhoven. Bart, thanks so much for joining us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you for the introduction, Elena, and welcome to everyone joining us from Chicago, the Netherlands, and the rest of the United States. Low-lying and crisscrossed by Europe's great rivers, the Netherlands is a country defined by its relationship with water. And centuries of managing that water have, in turn, make the Netherlands a global authority on water challenges. In practice, that means coastal management and complex hydrological engineering, of course, but it also means efficient wastewater treatment, smart infrastructure, and building flood resiliency through clever planning and nature-based approaches. That last point, helping communities of all sizes build flood resiliency, is a particular focus of the Dutch network in the US, most visible in the Adaptation for All guide developed by our embassy, Arcadis, and the American Flood Coalition. Flooding from extreme precipitation events can overwhelm our stormwater systems, threaten public health, and damage homes, as we last have seen in July in the Netherlands and to extreme extents in Germany and Belgium, and as the people now dramatically experience in Louisiana. In the 20th century, flood resiliency efforts were characterized by mega projects, massive building projects that reduced flood risk through feats of engineering. In the Netherlands, the Delta Works; in Chicago, Deep Tunnel. Today, with climate change causing even more precipitation to fall in stronger storms and public budgets stretched thin, building resilient communities requires flexible, creative approaches. Approaches exemplified by Dutch cities like Rotterdam and Dutch companies like Arcadis. To protect property, health, and the environment, our communities must absorb more precipitation. But these measures must be planned and engineered in a cost-effective, efficient way. Chicago, a lakeside trading hub on a river carved out of a swamp, has much in common with the Netherlands. Both our pasts have been shaped by our waters. We will determine the course of our futures by building resiliency, adapting water challenges, and creating an innovative, equitable blue economy. The Consulate General of the Netherlands in Chicago looks forward to working with Current, with the City of Chicago and the broader Midwest to achieve that goal. I thank you all for attending what will undoubtedly be a fascinating conversation, and don't hesitate to reach out if you see opportunities for Dutch-American cooperation. We are happy to help connect Dutch expertise to American partners in the water sector or anywhere else. Elena, back to you.
Thank you so much, Consul General. We're so fortunate to have you here, and thank you so much for that really comprehensive landscape overview of the challenges we're facing and also the common features that we share. So that is what makes these kinds of conversations so exciting. We're really fortunate to have you here anchoring the Dutch American and Dutch Midwest collaboration. So thank you so much for joining us. So to build on the Consul General's opening problem statement, I think he said it perfectly. We're here to understand how to build these more flexible, nimble solutions. I'm really looking forward to introducing this panel, but I'm going to turn it over to each of you to introduce really yourselves and the work that you're doing from your perspective. And I'd like each of you to respond with the prompt, what are the specific challenges you're facing in the region, and how is your organization starting to address them? What are some of the things you're excited to share with the audience? But if you could each give a bit of an overview about that, I think that's the best way in to the substance of this conversation. And let's start, if we could, with Holly Sauter right here in the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District of Greater Chicago. Holly, again, is the principal civil engineer and is charged with helping to bring to life some of the vision that the Consul General laid out, and which I know MWRD has shared over time. So Holly?
Thank you, Elena. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. And my name is Holly Sauter. Like I said, I am a civil engineer with our stormwater department with the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District. Just a super brief overview of who we are and how we started. In the 1890s, we were formed to protect the Lake Michigan drinking water, and we were the sanitary district essentially for the area. As time evolved, we have a heavy water treatment infrastructure for wastewater, but in 2004, the MWRD became the stormwater authority for all of Cook County, or almost all of Cook County. And with that comes 129 or so communities that we serve, which is a hefty challenge because you have the city of Chicago proper, which is a very large entity, but also, we have varying sizes of communities all facing different but similar challenges in the fact that stormwater is a massive concern, especially with a city as old as this one is. There's a lot of impervious area. There's a lot of pre-established infrastructure that is undersized, under capacity, and we all know that as you've mentioned, that the storm incremental increases are significant for our area, and we really struggle with how to have a holistic approach towards that. So thank you. That's a super brief introduction for our.
Great, that's helpful, and we'll get into some of the details of the green infrastructure projects and other things that you're building in a bit. So thank you for that intro, John. So from the Rotterdam perspective, I'd love to go to you next to hear how you're addressing some of the critical challenges ahead of you.
Yeah, thank you, Elena. And I feel very honored to be attending here. And I'm one of the very few, possibly the only one sitting here in Europe and feeling the enormous time gap, because you're talking about good morning, everyone. And I'm around drinking time. So no worries about that. Talking about Rotterdam and about myself, I'm a strategic advisor on water management, urban water management, specifically climate change adaptation, urban development, because it's all together. You should see together. And I'm a civil engineer myself, Holly. But when looking back, same as Chicago. Well, there's one difference between Rotterdam and Chicago or Midwestern cities is that looking at climate change and the effects of climate change, that we in Rotterdam, 85% of our city is below sea level. So you could say we are the lowest lying delta in the world, but on the other hand, we are the safest delta in the world because of our levees and dikes, etc., etc., etc. Sea level rise is really a big issue, but I'm not going to elaborate about that, because we also feel the same effects of extreme precipitation and heat and drought, etc. So we've been working on that. We've got a huge and core, you could say, of sewer systems, etc., like also Holly said. But we are looking for the next step, and this is about climate change adaptation within a very dense environment, what you all face the same. So we have to look at integrated solution, multidisciplinary solutions, building with nature, etc., etc. And I think we have really crossed the next step and looking for new solutions. But we can elaborate on that in the panel discussion.
Great. Well, and John and Holly, we're always so grateful to have the public sector in the mix in these conversations because of obviously outsized leadership role and responsibility that you sort of bear on this issue. So thank you. We'll get into some of the details there. But let's shift to the sort of private civic side. Edgar, I think I'll go to you next. I'd love to hear from your perspective. Arcadis obviously involved in so many comprehensive planning efforts, but with this issue particularly in mind, what are some of the things that you'd like to highlight for the audience that are underway?
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks for having me on the line here today. An exciting topic, a big audience, which shows the relevance and importance of all this. So Edgar Westerhoff, based in New York City. You see an image behind me. Also a transplant from the Netherlands. I moved to New York about 10 years ago. I'm a water engineer by training and a planner. All of that is very relevant when we're talking about flood resilience. And I would say usually I'm blessed to live in a place like Manhattan, except for the past month, where parts of our subway flooded twice. And the flooded subway means, you can't really get around in the city. And I think that is part of the challenge we all face, including Chicago, Midwestern cities. This is not about, how do we plan for the norm? I think we are all at the threshold of, what does the extreme mean? We are still dealing with Hurricane Ida in the New Orleans, South Louisiana area, up to 300 millimeters in rain, 15 inches. So, it doesn't really matter if your drainage system can handle like 1 inch. It's really about dealing with the extreme, and where will that extreme volume of water be stored temporarily? And how will that be stored in such a way that there will not be any casualties? So, life safety, I think for many of these US cities is a vital factor. And even though, and I was intrigued by the Consul General's introduction, also in the Netherlands, we should not bless ourselves too much with the system that we have, because the extreme, as it happened during the recent flood disaster, is also reshaping the way we address risk and how we look at vulnerabilities. So I think it's time, summarizing this, we need to step over our own shadows and start to work together to see, how we can shape joint propositions, because it's clear that we need all the stakes and all the roles at the table when we are dealing with these massive, massive challenges to come. Thank you.
Great, thanks for that. And then to close out our introductions, Ryan Wilson from the Metropolitan Planning Council, working on some very grounded solutions to the issue of managing stormwater challenges here in our region. Ryan.
Thanks, Elena, and to Current, and of course to Bart and the Netherlands Consulate General. We appreciate your leadership in keeping these issues at the forefront. It's what helps change our region. And thank you especially for the work on the Adaptation for All guide. It makes complex solutions accessible in local communities, which is essential, is an essential service that all of us provide at this time. From the Metropolitan Planning Council, we believe in these sort of equitable approaches that help shape our sustainable and prosperous Chicago region. We've been doing that work for over 87 years now. I've not been around that long, but I have been around for a little while, and I work primarily on issues of stormwater and rainfall in our region and how it affects our city and our suburbs and the broader region. And we don't have the same set of coastal problems as Rotterdam or many of the coastal cities that are called out, New York City, for example, where water is going up and up and up. We have a much bouncier set of problems, both on our lake and in our rivers and local waterways. So we're oscillating between, as Edgar said, the extremes, high and low, which is really shaping how we need to approach our future. Because we're flat, urban, complex, almost entirely man-made, and held in the balance by those 19th and 20th century infrastructure solutions, as were called out earlier. Incredible solutions, and hats off to MWRD and the continued leadership in building these essential pieces of infrastructure for our region. But the balance is tipped, and too often that the damage that results from the systems being overwhelmed damage property, lead to pollution in our waterways, result in disease and public health issues, even crises, and death in some situations. And this isn't acceptable. We can't continue to allow this to happen, because in far too many situations, those who are damaged and the communities that are damaged are those that are also identified with historic lines of segregation and patterns of racism. That's the legacy of our region, and how the increasing climate crisis is affecting those who have the least in many cases, and have the least to bring to the table. So at the Metropolitan Planning Council, one of the things that I'm working on, the primary thing I'm working on, is a partnership with the Nature Conservancy we call Storm Store. And Storm Store is an initiative to stand up an environmental marketplace for stormwater volume in our region. We're currently working in support of the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District in their initial pilot of stormwater trading in Cook County. It's not available in City of Chicago yet. We hope that will expand in the near future. But we deeply believe that it is essential that we are able to decouple some portion of regulated stormwater management and allow a portion of that to be invested where it has the greatest net benefit for our communities and our watersheds. Currently, the patterns where private development is increasing the capacity of our infrastructure is not occurring in the places where it is most needed. And we want to see that change. We think that it's a multi-partner government, business, community solution, and that's what we're here to talk about today. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ryan, for that. And I want to just call out this theme of our new normal becoming more extreme that has come across every single person's introduction today. Certainly, we're feeling it here in the Midwest, in New York, in Dutch cities, in European cities, in the Gulf Coast, right? So this question of how we shift to a new normal that is more extreme, that looks very different than our past patterns suggest we might need to deal with things. How is that affecting planning horizons in each of your respective sectors? So all of us are doing planning, whether or not we are planners by trade. All of us are planning and thinking about scenarios for the future and what we need to do, sitting where we're sitting, to do our work more effectively. And I'm really curious. I think first to start with Holly and John. How are your planning horizons shifting inside the public sector to adapt to these more frequent and more severe precipitation events? What does that look like in practice? Is it a lengthening of the plan horizon or a shortening of the planning horizon? I'm curious about some of the tactical moves and conversations that are happening inside each of your respective public sector entities to deal with this.
I'll go first, John. At the MWRD, we're still sort of new on the stormwater scene as far as trying to catch up and retrofit, right? And we've got sort of a multifaceted approach. We started with the riverine flooding and restoration, right, through those and what projects could be done along the rivers to sort of mitigate the traditional flooding patterns that you could call out, right? But really, what we found was that there's just so much urban flooding here that we just had to develop a bigger approach. So with the localized and regional flooding that we have in an urban basis and not based on rivers overflowing their banks, we've got master planning efforts going on across different portions of the region, not necessarily bounded by a community's boundaries, but by where the area of effect is based on sewer sheds and the extreme, flooding problems that have been identified in those master plan areas. We have flood warning systems that we're talking about with one community to try to address we know when a stream is flashy, right? The weather system here is really good where we've got these flash flood warnings that go out to people, but what about urban ones, right? There's no capacity for something like that. So there's a discussion going on about how to, possibly set up some sort of warning system for people in that way. We love to see when we can't fund it, but we love to see our communities and, support them at least with the idea of, the basement backup programs that they have with the 50-50 match. A lot of them will do that. We see a lot of success that way because we all know it's not just overland flooding, but in Chicago in particular, right, there's just a lack of sewer capacity for these storms. And so it comes back into people's homes and there's health hazards and issues that are concerned, obviously, with these combined sewer systems, not only in our rivers, but in people's basements. So those backup programs are essential for some of those people.
Right.
So,
sorry, go ahead.
No, absolutely. Ask what you were going to say.
Well, I was going to just say, I really appreciate you calling out the basement flooding issue because, as Ryan pointed out, it really is the pattern of housing stock makes that a problem that is heavily concentrated on some of the south and west sides of our city where there are already, many other burdens, and it's really important that we think of ways to address that. But I especially appreciate you calling out just the sort of novelty of having to grapple with this urban surface flooding, and the new warning and alert systems for that. That's something that is really frontier, and I'm so glad the district is thinking about how to be a partner in that.
Yeah, thank you. We're trying to hit it at all heads. Any idea isn't a bad idea. It's, how does it play out? Is it feasible for something that we can work with and then apply here? It's really just finding the best. And like I said, every community is a little bit different, and it's because we work in partnership with these communities. It's really about their tolerance level as well, because they're the ones who are going to have to operate and maintain, these things on a daily basis, and they're the day-to-day contact with the residents. So, it needs to be functional for everyone.
Right. And I think we'll come back to this, but you're really talking about community partner capacity that has to be present in order to work with the public sector as we're trying to roll out some of these new solutions and approaches. And
and we could have a whole conversation.
That's right. Yeah. But I appreciate you getting into the mix now. That's great. And John, so, again, the Netherlands have been so forward thinking on master planning, but the intensity and frequency of these strong rain events and all of the different water problems that you mentioned, how has that shifted the planning horizon, and how is Rotterdam?
Same as already said. My thought shifted from planning to long-term scenarios, like you also mentioned, because we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know, but we the only thing we know is that the extreme events are going to happen more often and getting more extreme than we ever know before. So specifically talking about stormwater, extreme precipitation, etc. I feel a lot with Holly on many subjects. What we did, we have a very strong core in Rotterdam. Like I said, it's like the sewer system, etc., canals, etc. It's extremely important to maintain those assets. So asset management is an extreme important thing, and I noticed. Unfortunately, I haven't been to Chicago. I don't know the situation at your place, but I've been in the United States, of course. And what I mentioned is, what I noticed is that in Europe specifically, I think that there is a lot more attention for maintenance and budgeting also, budget for maintenance. I think it's extremely important to keep those budgets in order, because it's about the core of the system. Then again, talking about climate change effects, we all know the core system will not handle this. It's too much. It's about extremes. So we have to settle with it in the urban space, in the public environment or whatever. But then again, the public environment is also a place where people meet and walk, and there's traffic, and there's lots of other functionalities and things. So we have to think of new solutions that are multifunctional within this urban environment, like in Rotterdam, the water plazas, but also the green roof program in Chicago. There's a landscape to win, you could say, or also sorts of new concepts, new ideas within this public realm. That's also important, and then you can't concur anymore with the other functions in there. So you have to, it's essential, you have to cooperate or collaborate or whatever, co-create, for instance, with the other parties that are also having functions within this public realm. So therefore, you need to look at new solutions, and it's also a little bit like Holly said, because we can't do it without the environments. And then you're talking about communities, and then you're talking about all kinds of difference, and then it's just place. The place matters. It's about people. It's about the place. It's about physical circumstances, whatever. And that's what we are trying to do in Rotterdam, also for the long term, to kind of map it somehow,
Right.
but both physically, but also socially. And I think that's the next step within the ideas of integrated adaptation solutions. And of course, that's the ultimate challenge, because we're not used to do it, and we are fighting against silos, and we all know the problems. But so this is a kind of a bottom-up scenario, small scale solutions, very important.
Yep.
On the other hand, you also have to work with the more or less top-down, bigger scale solutions, like Edgar will say about New Orleans, probably. Edgar?
Yeah,
I think so.
Right, well, that's great. I want to pick up on two really important things you said, and then I saw Ryan's hand raised. I want to lob this to Edgar and Ryan, but to really lift up this point about financing and the partnership type financing that it takes to get these long-term projects done. So I know I asked you all to think about this, how is it changing your planning horizons and your scenario planning question, but specifically, and I think Ryan, I'd love to start with you. Your hand was raised, but StormStore is about creating a market and stimulating a market for nature-based solutions and green infrastructure. So I would love to hear just a little bit of your thoughts about how that's playing out and what we need to do to stimulate demand.
Yeah, sure. So yes, StormStore is a response to the limits in public funds available. The district is financed through a property tax base, and there's a limit to how much funds can be expended on stormwater and wastewater throughout our region. We have many municipalities that have very limited tax bases, very limited capacity to make investments, very limited to take on debt financing for infrastructure. And increasingly, we've seen many of these communities over the last year and a half be stressed by other social and economic and workforce issues, frankly. So we're in a bad position for those nearly 200 municipalities that Holly's talking about regionally to be able to finance all this beautiful, important, effective nature-based solutions, as well as the gray and traditional infrastructure as well. So StormStore is really intended to leverage, to be a tool that public utilities like MWRD, like the City of Chicago, can use to leverage where they need to see the investment, where they cannot quickly or efficiently get infrastructure into because one, it's on private land, or two, they don't have the money to put into the infrastructure that's needed in those local communities. So a stormwater trading market and StormStore is intended to allow both local communities to identify problems and be part of the solutions by building those credit generating or sellable, tradable pieces of infrastructure in locations where they most need it. Also, it can potentially generate a revenue source for long-term operations and maintenance of those assets. But currently, why it makes sense for a utility to make these investments is because they know where the problems are. As Holly mentioned, these watershed plans do identify where the problems are, but they're not the kind of social, cultural, local, inclusive economic development plans that maybe John was starting to hint at. And we need that overlay. The local communities and the regional planning agencies, they know more of those aspects, and we need to see more of the leadership on the equity front combined with the leadership on the infrastructure front. We think this sort of public-private partnering is one essential method.
That's great. Oh, go ahead.
Elena, can I piggyback into that?
Yeah, of course, please. Thank you.
Just to kind of tag team with what Ryan was talking about, it's I particularly run the green infrastructure portion of our stormwater group, and it is a big challenge. The way we do projects is we do it through an open application that's open for from Memorial Day to Labor Day this year. So it's open if anybody's out there and interested. It's available until September 6th is when we close it. But we send we only have the authority to really partner with public agencies. So it could be park districts, it could be, but private entities, we don't we don't fund their own work. It's just not something that we can do. And like Brian said, with being a taxing body, we have an authority and an obligation to spend our funds a certain way. And we've really tried to create an open space and reach out additionally to some of those communities that Ryan's talking about that have those disadvantages. And it's really difficult. We are a staff of 4 for green infrastructure for 129 plus communities. And, we make all the effort that we can to reach out and try to help, but sometimes it's just we're not resonating correctly or something. And green infrastructure is a new animal for a lot of people. And it creates a lot of trepidation. It certainly doesn't always, do the same level of effort as a traditional gray approach would be, but we're looking at it as, every bit helps, right? Every amount that you can pull off of the problem is that much less to deal with. But at the same time, as John brought up, maintenance is a huge problem in the Chicago area, and I'm sure it's a huge problem across green infrastructure on the whole. It's the knowledge base and the funding capacity, and that's where we really struggle with a group of people. So
right, great. And thank you. I was just going to ask Holly to drop it, but Ryan's dropped in the chat. The green infrastructure program that Holly mentioned is open. But I think you've called out again the capacity and sort of leveling up of information that we all have about not only what are the solutions that are available, but what will it take to install, finance, operate, maintain them over time. And that's a floor we all have to be lifting together. So I appreciate that response.
That's where Ryan's group helps to kind of bridge that gap, because they're able to get a little bit more in the weeds than we can. We just don't have the capacity. So
right.
All together that way.
Right. And then I want to shift to a sort of maybe different level of scale, but to think about other kinds of private sector investments in this. There's an audience question, and Edgar, I'm hoping I can put this to you, but also get your broader perspective here. But how are private actors starting to value and think differently about the benefit cost, maybe the risk scenarios here, where we're thinking about water infrastructure, absorbency, resiliency, stormwater? How do we value those things in real estate incentive packages, or the policies that are incentivizing a particular kinds of infrastructure to be built? How's the private sector thinking about the value of those investments relative to something that might be a little bit more traditional? Love to hear kind of how the business case is changing.
Yeah, no, I mean, what I hear, and also for Holly and Brian, it's clear that we are in this together, right? So our communities, it's a broad set of participants, stakeholders, all with an invested reason to move in a certain direction. And I think what is needed to bring the urgency across that threshold is, it has to do with the perception of risk. And risk cannot be resolved just by yourself. Just look at the complexity of our landscapes, our urban centers, but also outside in suburban areas, rural areas. It doesn't matter where you are. You're always part of a system. And I think private sector contributors, stakeholders, are very much aware that they are part of that system, and trying to bring solutions there requires all the stakeholders at the table, and that is a responsibility, Holly and Ryan. That is something our urban leadership, talking about Chicago, needs to facilitate, or in Houston, or in Miami, or right at this moment in New Orleans. And I think we just start to advance the needle there in that regard, because it's talking about that business case. For example, the business case for resilience was a white paper that Arcadis published about 2 years ago. I'll publish that or post it in the chat in a little bit. It is really about peeling off the challenge that you have, and the next step is to bring a shared understanding of risk and vulnerability, and by allocating certain values of your problem to certain owners, you can identify different funding streams, for example, and that doesn't have to be public funding alone. There's a lot of private money out there waiting to be invested in your private, in your public space. There's some really good examples that can be found in Rotterdam, Duck Park, for example, Roof Park. It's not just providing protection, providing community resilience, but there's a shopping mall integrated in that solution. There's other coastal examples where parking is integrated. So it's not just resolving a problem, it's also generating revenue. And those are often revenue streams that are being brought to the table by private investors. And I think we are starting to see more and more of those kind of examples where authorities beyond the conventional, like flood control districts, are starting to realize, hey, this play can become much more interesting if we bring at an early stage certain private sector stakeholders to the table. So Houston, for example, they were post-Harvey, got the realization, what it means if 40 to 50 inches of rain drops on your community. How can you resolve that at the community scale level? It was mentioned, backflow or basement inundation. Well, the basement inundation doesn't just relate to your own basement. There's a backflow issue. There's a streetscape issue. There's a community scale issue, and you can even build that further out to regional challenges. So how do you craft a master plan that is acknowledging and receptive to that broader scale of thinking? And then I think lastly, what kind of strategies come to mind when you want to resolve that? What scale of strategy comes to mind? I think in Rotterdam, these water parks have gotten a lot of attention, but is that enough to resolve a challenge at the neighborhood scale? Or do you need something like Room for the River, which we've seen also in Midwestern cities? Have much more capacity to resolve your problems further downstream. Currently, the Mississippi, we've seen how the Mississippi is streaming north. So what does that mean with 15 inches of rain, and now it's all coming back to New Orleans? So flood control, watershed management, start at the highest level, large-scale interventions, and then work your way down. Don't be blindfolded by, like the beautiful water squares, which of course every community finds fantastic, and every investor would like to have their storefront right at that water square. No, we really need to think bigger, because again, the climate extremes will inform what is needed, not just the norm. We need to plan for the extreme.
Yeah, I want to really drill down into this sort of statement about there's funding available, but we need to find places and ways for it to land. And I want to tie in an audience question about documenting results. And I think, Ryan, I know you're grappling with this a lot in Storm Store, Holly as well, thinking about the performance of your green infrastructure projects. But how do we start to show the value of projects that are being built? What are the most important ways of communicating like the very complicated set of benefits? It's not all financial return, right? It's also social return and sort of reducing the overall performance risk of the landscapes we, rely on for our health and well-being. But so how do we start to communicate that value in ways that really resonate with the investors that we need to be putting in dollars for construction and maintenance?
Well, I'll wager to answer that to some extent. I mean, I think that we know that floods and basement backups damage our properties. It's called out in the Adaptation for All guide that there's a value to that damage, and at least there's an equal at least response to that. For the last 10 years, we've seen the Center for Neighborhood Technology here in Chicago try to put a cost to that urban flooding and popularize that term locally. But there's also the health costs. There's the insurance claims. There's a lot of ways to value that damage from a damages side, but I think there's also value to many of those community benefits that occur from nature-based solutions or other multi-benefit solutions that are being described. Edgar, I think, listed a number that are really exceptional, and we're trying to, and many folks around our region are trying to value those more qualitative experiences in addition to property values and other things. So that's one way to start. I'd be interested, Edgar and John, how you're seeing this occur elsewhere.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I would really like to answer this because we've got the same problem in Rotterdam, of course, and like Edgar's he's absolutely right. You've got to have these system approaches, probably funded by national governments or whatever. But those are really important. Absolutely sure. But within a city and looking at the effects of climate change, they are very local. They are in cities. They are in regions, whatever. We all know about that. And like you already mentioned, one of the really great solutions is adding green towards the environment. But adding green is not only a solution, but it's also good for health and good for, it looks nice. It's so these, like you already mentioned, Brian, a bit, we've got these ecosystem dynamics and ecosystem economics also, because you can say what's the worth of a tree or whatever, but we all know that green in the public realm is much more worth, and you can't explain it economically probably, but you know that there's benefits in its health or whatever. And I think that's a very interesting field of study, at least, but also to be talking about leadership and also leadership within a municipality. I'm convinced we should all, like Holly also does, emphasize the worth of those projects and maybe nudge it some a bit or whatever, and try to be creative with our budgets in order to have those kind of solutions. Because what Edgar is saying, he's absolutely right. But suppose you've got 1,000 streets within your city and you changed it into, well, climate adapted streets or whatever, green blue streets, or you can name it what you want. But 1,000 streets are not really expensive probably, but also help the same as a major water storage facility in concrete underground somewhere, but you can't see. So there's a lot to gain.
Yeah,
maybe to build on that.
So,
Thank you.
With, I mean, what we see starting to happen, maybe more in coastal communities, say in Boston, of course, also with extreme precipitation challenges, system challenges, but then there's also the coastal component, is that business communities are starting to form alliances, because they came to realize that having flood insurance is not giving them any solution, because if the flood waters come, they still have damage, and they still don't have any solution. So what if you, instead of buying flood insurance, bring your proposition together, your financial proposition, and in that way capitalize on your the losses that you avoid through a solution. So don't pay insurance premiums, but buy yourself a solution. And I think that realization, also looking at the image behind me, a financial district master plan, the big U, there's a lot of planning and thinking starting to happen, taking communities out of a floodplain, but you can also translate that to the streetscape when you don't have a coastal community. And you form a financial mechanism where you capitalize the loss that you avoid, make that part of the business case. And add that also in the mix when you talk to private investors.
Right.
For example, financial district, it's not something the city is taking on themselves. There will be development in that space. And how do you do that? So trying to to peel off that business case, and I posted the business case for resilience in the chat for the audience to take a look at. But that is being explained, and it all starts with bringing stakeholders at the table and have an open conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think we've just heard, the public sector is really one of the main places that we are able to sort of zoom out and say, okay, across a budget portfolio, how are we balancing public health risk, environmental risk, infrastructure risk, and thinking about the return in terms of a city's budget investment or a metropolitan water reclamation district investment. But really, only a city has that broad view of the sort of ecosystem economics that you mentioned, John, until we start to see, Edgar, the kinds of coalition level, business investments that you're talking about. I think that's a really exciting frontier where investors do start to think about managing their risk in terms other than just, the pure financial return that comes from offsetting, an insurance purchase or something like that. So I know Ryan has his hand raised, but I just want to, that's a fundamentally large shift that could be really exciting in terms of generating investment we need.
Yeah, and I agree that's an essential approach. And I would just say on the complement to that sort of approach is the sort of thing that's happening, and it's happening in the Bay Area with the World Resources Institute, their Public Benefits Authority pilot that's running. That's an example where a region has identified while there are many different agencies that are working in parallel, they're not working together, and there are inefficiencies to the cost of how they manage their public assets. The assets could be literally adjacent to each other, and they're managed by different workforces. They get materials from different places. There is a huge opportunity for efficiency within places like Chicago to work across the Park District, Housing Authority, transportation, and then moving into partnership and collaboration with other utilities. And that is essential too, if we were to be able to move forward.
Yeah, thank you for calling that out. I mean, I think what this always comes back to, we start out talking about technology and the performance of green infrastructure and things that we know we have a solution set for, but there will obviously continue to be innovation, and that's great. But of course, it comes back to the underlying institutional frameworks we have to support this, the finance, the governance mechanisms, the ability to think more broadly, and the public benefits frame. Brian, I don't know if there's a resource you're able to drop on the Bay Area work with WRI, but I think it would be really terrific to point that out as a frontier opportunity. I think that's really exciting work. And I think there's so much institutional innovation that we are all going to need to invest in and drive. And it's come out in different ways here today. I'm mindful that we only have about 6 minutes left, and this is obviously a really exciting and generative conversation that could go on much longer. But I think everyone has underscored this importance of learning and the sort of features that we need to learn from. And I wonder if we can just put a sharp point on what are some of the most important things that we all need to be paying attention to in the features of projects we're testing right now, whether it's thinking about documenting their value, thinking about how to get the word out to the sorts of participants, Holly, that you mentioned that need to own and championing them. But what are some of the learning dimensions we need to all be looking for? Because it's, there's many different kinds of case studies, and I think the most effective ones are the ones that really drill down into the make-break features of these projects. So I'm curious what some of those would be from your perspectives. Anyone can take that.
Oh, I mean, for us in particular, the more installations we have as the years have passed, the more importance. I mean, I hate to just be like drilling on this, right? But honestly, it's maintenance. Maintenance is such an insurmountable thing sometimes, and that's the knowledge base, right? Like, you put something in a location where the workforce staff that's employed there has never seen. They don't necessarily understand why the maintenance O&M plan is so extensive compared to all the other things that they have in town, and they think, well, if I skip it, it's not a big deal, right? Like, whatever. And we all know that GI is only as good as its maintenance track record, right? So we're looking at doing some pilot schools for the suburb program, similar to our Space to Grow, which is here, which is a lot of green infrastructure on a schoolyard, because they have property, which is unique, right? Most of Chicago is still built in micro pieces of property, but schools have a lot of property. So what we're looking at with this pilot program for the suburban schools is to incorporate a maintenance training effort for the school staff. And that's the next best thing we can think. Yep. I'm gonna shut up. Maintenance training and yep. Learning, and why, not only just what to do, but why it's important and why you do these things.
Well, and that's really important because it's a workforce development opportunity. We're about to see the biggest potential investment, in the United States in infrastructure and recovery, opportunities
yes.
to create a workforce that is, able to do that work. So I think you're pointing to something that's important on multiple fronts.
And just back to the funding thing too, there is a lot of private money out there, and we always encourage people to go find additional funding, for the pieces that we don't. But unfortunately, nobody budgets enough for maintenance, I think. And then there are little to no funding opportunities out there for people to recapture that maintenance funding when they realize I need to pour some money into this or revitalize my program in the GI, and there just isn't funding for that. And that's kind of a gap piece too.
Yep, great.
Yeah.
So maintenance workforce. Yep.
Yeah,
Who wanted to jump in?
I totally
Great.
sympathize with Holly, of course. I mean, it's very easy, you know. New developments are always sexy. Maintenance, boring. You can't go to an anniversary party and say I'm in maintenance or so. You're boring, which is not the case, effectively. But so okay, there's a problem. You can't compare the systems within Europe or the Netherlands or the United States, of course. But I do have a problem, and already, Eleni, I think you mentioned it. What I think is a major issue is the silos, organization. It's all separated. It's all we've got our own responsibilities. We've got our own tasks, and sometimes it's very hard to meet and I really think, and it should be. All solutions should be integrated, and this means you have to talk with the people from green infrastructure and water management and whatever, and on all scales, also on a small scale, neighborhood scale, but also, of course, like Edgar is doing with his company on a major scale. So we should break up. Things are happening. We should break those silos. That's one thing, and of course I've got other problems. But okay, last one. What's very funny is that looking at a municipal environment, urban environment, 40% is public space, 60% is private property. So when you want to have your city completely climate proof or something like that, you can't do it alone. As a municipality, you need those 60% private investment, and we already mentioned it. So private is part of the solution.
Yep, public, great. And I think specifically if we're talking about make-break features in the silo busting, it's like documenting where that performance has generated results, right? The budget directors that have made those decisions that have then led to surpluses that allow for maintenance or other examples of that in a concrete form, I feel really important. Edgar, I know you are up.
Yeah, no, well, maybe we are running out of time, but one thing, we observe in working throughout the US for many, of our city clients, it's about the process, it's about driving efficiency. You have a complex challenge and you want to move to a solution. So, never take the process for granted. I've been on the client side for many years, and also being a part of the private sector, we need to design the process together, because we need to create best practices. And for that, we need to create pilot projects. Let's not be shy in making mistakes. Let's please make mistakes and learn from that. Don't put it through that legal, challenge, that framework that we've created in the US. Let's craft pilot projects to really advance the challenges that we have, and that's a process that needs to be designed.
Perfect. I echo that call. That is terrific. Yep. I think we do more, and documenting the lessons from failure as part of the journey towards success. I mean, that's absolutely critical.
Absolutely.
So I really appreciate your call for that. Ryan, and last word on critical lessons to document.
I agree. I agree. There's a lot of work here. I mean, the big shift I think in our kind of professional circles and community circles is the incorporation of more voices, broader participation, both in the informing where the problems are, but the types and different variety of solutions that can exist. And I think we need to document so many good examples that are happening locally, nationally, internationally, and learn from as many of those as possible. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. I know we could continue this conversation for days to come, and I hope that everyone who's still on will join us for Water Week coming up here in Chicago, October 11th through 15th. There's still time to become a program partner if you haven't. I suspect there will be many conversations that continue to go deeper on this particular issue, as it is such a pressing challenge for all of us. But I really appreciate John, Edgar, Holly, Ryan, all the work that you're doing from each of your public, private, civic perspectives to keep us moving forward faster together to solve the issue of climate change and the way that we're feeling that as weather here in our regions and across the ocean and the Netherlands too. So we'll keep the learning exchange going. Lots more events coming up. You can do the QR code on your screen if you'd like to join us for the next Third Coast to talk about reverse osmosis and how we keep our water cleaner. And in general, just always look forward to collaborating with all of you that are on the line and pitch opportunities to us. We'd love to have future events to go deeper on this topic and others. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful rest of the days. John, enjoy happy hour. Everybody else, have your second coffee. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Elena. Thank
everybody.
Thank you for everything. And
Yes.
we would love to keep in touch
Yes.
from the Netherlands. Okay.
Well, the work will continue. Yeah. All right.
Okay.
Thanks everyone for joining us.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.